All right, so in this live stream, we're going to talk about how to build large Android applications. So now that you kind of know the basics of how Android works, some of the pieces that go together, um, obviously you don't know everything, but now you're starting to piece all these different activities together, passing data back and forth. It's going to get really confusing really quickly if you don't understand how to build applications in scale. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to kind of show you my process of how I go about doing it. I'm going to leave some of the minor steps off, but this is kind of the overall generalization of if a client comes to me and says, I have this website, or I have this service, or I have this product, or whatever it is that they do as a business, I want to make a mobile app of it. Okay, so then you go through the process of, you have to list out your features here. So get my, oh no, I'm going to run out of memory, aren't I? 2 letters in. All right, let's see if this works. All right, so what I was going to do is, if I can write. So features, we have a feature list. So again, a client comes to me, let's say it's an oil change, kind of sticking with our theme from last class. Our oil change company says, we want to have a product that allows our users to keep track of their oil changes for their car and alert them when they need an oil change so that they can come back and get their oil changed. And maybe we can send them a coupon when they do that, say, hey, your oil change is coming up, it's been 6 months, or we've seen that you've driven 5,000 miles or whatever, and you have this type of oil, so maybe that type of oil is 7,500 miles per oil change or something like that, that sort of thing. So you usually go to a client and you talk about these things. You say, oh, and as mobile experts, developer experts, you should be able to put forth ideas like, hey, we can do push notifications, or we can do coupons, or all these different things that I just mentioned. You should be able to articulate and communicate to the user, or excuse me, to the client, because that is an opportunity for you to upsell. They can get really, really excited, like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's really cool. Yes, I want to do it, but maybe I can't afford it at this moment. Maybe that's version 2, or maybe they just thought, hey, let's just have an app to track oil changes. And you're like, well, here's the hook, here's the sticky part. We can make your app sticky to the users so that once they have the app, it's constantly communicating with them. It's telling them, it's giving them advice on their car and how they should keep up their car, rather than kind of just leaving it up to them to come back into the store. And so those are some of the features that you list. And not all of them will make the final cut. Some of them, it'd be really great to have coupons, but then after talking about it, it's like, well, how do we give that coupon? Do they just take it off at the register, or is there types of like a QR code to scan or something like that? But then they don't have the infrastructure on their servers, and so that might be a little bit of a can of worms that you might want to avoid. But usually starting out, we just list all the features. So one is I want to track the mileage. So let's try this again. Features list. We can keep it short for this class, but I'm going to track the mileage. If I can spell, man, it's a little scratchy. Okay, so I'm going to track the mileage. I want to also have like a local notification of the oil change, and so as a user, I'm going to know, maybe it's part of my account, or maybe I enter it in manually. I'm going to know when my last oil change is. I'm going to enter it into the app, and then I'm going to put a date attached to it, and then what that's going to do under the hood, so to speak, is it's going to create a local notification and then fire that off in 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is you want to have. So we have that. I also want to kind of, some of the features, these are more kind of driven, data-driven type features, but the data itself, I want to be able to kind of sort that. So I want to see, hey, what's the oil change that I got synthetic oil on, or this type of brand. So you should be able to sort by those and see when you got that, and maybe give your car performance a rating. So maybe we have some ratings. And that could either be for the car performance, or it could also be the employee that changed your oil or whatnot. Again, just talk about what goals and what features that the client wants to have. And so mostly what we'll usually start off with before we even create this feature list are the goals. So in other words, you go to the client says, I want to create an app. You say, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you going for? Are you just trying to get more users? Are you trying to have a better experience for your users? Do you want your existing users to come back more often? And they're like, yes, all of the above. And you're like, okay, well, let's narrow it down. Let's focus on maybe 2 or 3 key features, key goals, and create these rules or pillars against your application. So in other words, let's say, okay, well, I want to do everything above. I want to have more user or customers. I want to have those customers come back more often. I want to have a better user experience, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, well, okay, maybe starting out with version 1.0, let's concentrate on, we want the existing users to come back more often. It is harder to get new users than it is to have existing users come back. This is what we call the cost of acquisition versus like resell and if you have an existing user base, you can blast an email out to them, you can contact them usually, but to go out and find new users, a lot harder. So hopefully that's obvious, but so one of the goals that we would probably have in here is existing users, existing customers. This app kind of slurs my writing, kind of reformatted that for me. Customers, existing customers coming back. All right. So that's one of our goals. We also want to have that better user experience. And the reason I'm writing these down is because as I go through the creation of the app, and I have a decision to make. I say, well, should this tab be first? Should this tab be second? Where does this feature go? By having these experience, I don't know why I can't write today. I can say, okay, well, number one is I want existing users to come back more often because that means more money in my pocket. More money in my pocket, I can do better things. But I also, one of the ways to support that is have a better user experience. I want my users to say, this is the best oil change company in the world. They have an app, it's really convenient. I just go in, I can maybe schedule appointments through the app, whatever, all these different things. But those all go back to your key pillars or your goals of I want more money, basically users coming back more often, and then I want those users to be happy. Happy users, they come back. So those are kind of self-reinforcing goals there. All right, let's just keep it simple there, but you can kind of get the idea that you want to write these things down again so you can go back to it and say, okay, I'm kind of lost in the design. Where am I heading? Where do I need to be? Kind of a refresher there. Okay, so another thing is, you get your features list, you get your goals, all that fun stuff. Well, then the next thing is, what technologies do you need? Because this is really going to affect the overall development of the application. So if I need to develop a whole entire backend server to support users, their password reset, enforce or verify, or maybe passwords have to be 8 characters long with 1 character or 1 special symbol and a number, yada yada. All that takes time. If you can leverage something like Firebase or some other existing technology, great. But again, think about all these technologies that you may need. So let's say server with user management. I mean, that's a whole piece in itself. Do you have a website? Do you need a website? Do you need a web component? If you do, and you need everything above, you might want to think about, let's say I need iOS, I need Android, I need Windows Mobile, I need every mobile operating system under the sun, and I need a website, and I need it to work on my car's heads-up display, etc. You might want to think about a web technology instead of mobile, because you're going to have to develop it for all of those natively, and unless they have millions and millions of dollars, that might not be feasible. So again, listing out your technologies could kind of give you a better idea of what's actually involved with it. Local notifications, there's an API for that, so it's just the normal Android SDK. Tracking mileage, that's just data. Sorting, again, that's just data. But maybe I do need a database, an embedded database. So that's actually, that is something that you might want to list. And so this is actually what you did for homework 2, hopefully. You'll probably need network access, internet, which is not that hard, but this does introduce some issues if I don't have a data plan on my phone, or my data plan is a small data plan. Maybe I only have a gig or two of data, and so I don't necessarily want to connect the app to it. Or again, I just don't have network access where I am. Maybe the garage is some kind of Faraday cage, and while I'm in that garage getting my oil changed, it doesn't work. So you can think of, hey, well, all of these oil change branches have the same wireless SSID. So maybe you can automatically connect the Wi-Fi to the SSID, or at least pop up a message saying, hey, would you like to connect to this? So again, this kind of just drives features and how much work it's going to be. I mean, if we're talking like Bluetooth connectivity, so you can connect it to your car, so you get the readout of your mileage, that's a whole nother can of worms. And so the more cans of worms you have, you're going to be knee-deep in worms pretty soon. So again, try to list out everything that you can think of off the top of your head. Talk to the client, see what their goals are, see what features they're interested in. Clients tend to like the flashy, shiny, sizzly type features, like virtual reality. It's like, hey, we don't need virtual reality because it's an oil change app, but they get really excited about it because it's fancy, it's new, it doesn't make sense, but it's still fancy. So try to bring them down to earth a little bit, but let them kind of soar and get excited about the project, because they'd be more willing to go through and fund that project. All right, and then kind of another one is, this really depends on a lot of things, but the monetization. If I can spell monetization. So is this app going to be for free? Probably, if it's for a company. You don't want any barrier of entry to your application, especially if it's a big organization that you're also giving money to. So they might just have it out there for free, and what I like to tout as another advertising point. So with advertising, you put X number of dollars out there. If it's for magazine or newspaper or any kind of print ads, you honestly don't know how many eyeballs have actually seen it. You don't know how many people have acted on those ads. So it's like, hey, go to our website or download our app from the App Store. Well, you don't necessarily know, again, where those people are coming from if it's in a newspaper, unless you have some kind of URL that can track that. But monetization, yeah, for this one, it's probably going to be free. But if you decide, I'm going to have in-app purchases, I'm going to have maybe a freemium model, and then you're going to have an in-app purchase to get more features. That's a possibility, even for an oil change company, because maybe there's like a calculator or some kind of feature, or driving caddy that tracks your mileage and whatever. That might be an additional in-app purchase, or something that the company can give away for free after you get like 3 oil changes, right? So pay $1.99 to get these extended features to better maintain your car, or just come in for 3 oil changes and you get that for free. You get a little promo code, and that somehow unlocks it through your account or something like that. So again, those are all features, those are all development. That's going to be dev time that you're going to have to put in if you decide to go with like the in-app purchase. So free's obviously pretty easy, but write it down, make a note of it. All right, so once we have kind of the overall structure, there we go, all that fun stuff. Maybe make a mess of my design here. So you kind of have all these things laid out. Obviously, make a nice grid, maybe put this into a spreadsheet or whatever. This will actually help you write up a scope of work for your client. So you say, okay, well, we agreed on tracking mileage, local notification. We're going to have some kind of sorting in there, ranking or ratings. You put all that into a scope of work, and then you agree upon a price, whether that's going to be hourly or a flat rate. And then you say, okay, this is what I'm going to build for you, and let's ready, set, go. And then sometimes when they come back and say, hey, can you add this feature and this feature and this feature? You say, yes, but that's going to be extra. And they say, well, what are you talking about? We talked about that at the beginning, at our first meeting. You know, you gave me all these ideas, and then you gave me a price. Well, it's like, well, this is the scope of work that we agreed on. Any other features outside of the scope is out of scope, and thus is going to be a little bit more. And just lay that out up front so nobody feels cheated. So just say, these are the features. If you want additional features, we can either make that into version 2 and have another scope of work and another agreement, or what I like to do for clients that are kind of wishy-washy on what they truly want. They're like, I kind of want these things, and I'm not really sure how it's going to look, and maybe I want to add some features later. That's a good candidate for an hourly rate, because those types of clients will change their mind a lot, or they'll like to add stuff after they see it, and you really can't ever predict what the price on that's going to be. You might quote them as $5,000 or $10,000, and then the next day they say, oh, well, I want all this stuff, this stuff, this stuff, this stuff. I want a whole server backend. I want this, I want that. And you're like, well, that's more like $50,000. And they're like, what? You already said $10,000. I know, but it's all this extra stuff. So again, just communication, laying these things out initially, and then try not to give a price, like a ballpark figure. Everybody likes to have a ballpark figure, which is really good for weeding out certain clients. So for example, you get a lot of these people, for lack of a better term, off the street. They just email you and they'll say, hey, you know, I'm interested in building an app. Buddy of mine, you know, we're talking over drinks or something. It'd be really cool to build this app. What's a ballpark, you know, how much do you usually charge? And they don't give me the idea because everybody thinks I'm going to steal their idea. But they do say, you know, I want this app idea. What's the ballpark? And I'm just like, well, that's kind of my first indication that it's probably not somebody who has done this before in terms of hiring a developer and outsourcing development for projects like this. Because I'll say, oh, it could be from anywhere, and I usually throw out just a random kind of high-ish number. Let's say $3,500, starts at $3,500 per platform, and it could be anywhere till $50,000, which is all true. But the range on that is a little ridiculous, right? It's like that tells them almost nothing about what the cost of development is. You know, it's either 35,000 or 3,500 or 50,000. It's kind of like going to buy a car. It's like, okay, I want to go buy a car. What, you know, how much is that going to cost me? Well, yeah, it's going to cost you about $3,500 for a decent car. It could cost you all the way up to $50,000. Of course, there's cars that are 500 times that, but you get the idea. What that does is it weeds out the people that think that your app development is going to only be like $500. So it's like, oh, $3,500? That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking it was kind of like my Uncle Fred back in the late 90s who would charge me $300 for a website. That's kind of what they're thinking. And so, again, it's these, it's putting out those prices that kind of weeds out those people that are not going to value your time. So a little bit of an aside, but do think about these types of things as you go out into the world. And not only that is, you think $3,500 is a lot of money for an app, but for a salaried developer, let's say just starting out, roughly about, let's say $60,000, because that's roughly the beginning salary of a graduating computer science major. Maybe not here in Boise. I don't know. That's the national average, is about 64, I think, $64,000, something like that. What that equates to in hourly rate is about $32 an hour. So for $32 an hour, just back of the napkin, 32,000, right? And let's just say it's, sorry, 3,200. Man, I just totally messed that up. 3,200. And let's say we charge $32 an hour. Okay, so that's about 100 hours of work, or roughly 2.5 weeks of work. So for a salaried developer, not even including benefits, that's about 2.5 weeks worth of work. And so you might think that's a lot of money, but that's what a company would pay one developer for that much, for that amount of time. Then that's not exactly 2.5 weeks, but it's a couple days. All right. So that's kind of monetization, how all that kind of begins so that you even know what you're building. A lot of developers will just sit down and start to code. They'll create an activity. They'll start laying stuff out on the screen. And that's where the spaghetti code starts, is because they need to create another feature. Okay, well, let me wire this number 1 feature up to number 2 feature. Now I add 3, so let's wire 2 to 3, but then number 1 also needs that feature, so let's start connecting all these things. There's a video coming out on Wednesday that kind of shows this, where you have like feature one here, feature 2 here, and kind of how all these connections happen. And it gets really spaghettified. And so the video that's coming out on Wednesday will kind of show you how to decouple these different features, but we'll get there. No, video is coming out on Wednesday. I won't necessarily talk about it in class. I had a video that I recorded a while ago that I finally got around to editing, so I scheduled that to come out tomorrow. But yeah, it's on a certain Android technology called Event Bus. But we'll cover it in here, but I'll kind of skim over it just because you can just watch the video for homework. All right, any questions about this so far? All right, so let me see if I can get a new document here. Oh boy. Hopefully I kept the last one. All right, so again, you have, let's say you go through the whole process, you have a scope of work that you and your client have agreed upon, you have your goals that'll kind of drive the direction of the project, what you're aiming for. Now you're ready to begin. So you sit down, you open up Android Studio, and you start to code. Well, no, let's back up a second. We need to know what we're building. So we now have the idea, but in terms of content or actual like screens and everything like that. Let me get my palette back, sorry. How do I lay out my application? So again, I have my goals, I have my features. How do I lay that out? We're going to create what's called wireframes. And you probably have seen this before. And this will be one of your homework assignments, is for your final application that you're going to build. First, we're going to agree on a scope of work. We're going to agree on a price. You're going to give me some price that you're going to charge. You're going to justify it. You come to me and you say, I'm going to charge you $150 an hour. I'm going to ask what law school you went to and ask why you're charging that rate. Yeah. Question?
Can we by any chance see other applications that have been built by another process?
I don't have them. I usually purge them. So the question was, can we see previous students' application work? Short answer is no. I do have one. I mean, there's a couple of students that have released their apps to the App Store. I can show you them on the App Store, but I mean, again, I just purged the code after a couple months because it takes up hard drive space, and I've seen I don't have a lot of hard drive space these days. Why? What's your goal in asking that question?
I want to see how good they are.
Okay. Yeah. It's a good question. You're the first one in 6 years to ask me that. But again, I can track down some that I've actually gone to the store. There was one of the best ones I saw was last year. Um, I could probably just take screenshots of it or something like that. I can track it down if I have it. Like sometimes people don't remove me from their Git repos, so sometimes most of the time I just go and I remove myself, but we'll see. And I'll take screenshots so you can see it. But the ones on the App Store I can definitely show you. There's one called, previous student did a game called, what is it? Let me look it up real quick. He did it for both platforms. Catpocalypse. So, yeah, there was a former student. His name was John. He did Catpocalypse, just a game. It's a lot of fun. He did a really good job on it, but I could show you that one. There was another one of my favorites called Burrito Finder. It's what it sounds like. You go find burritos in Boise. Yeah, it's a cool app. So I can show you some of those examples, but those are kind of outliers and not necessarily what I'm expecting for you guys for your finals, but yeah, it's worth kind of seeing. We will go through different apps on the App Store to demonstrate why those are good, why the listings are good at least, and we'll talk all about those. But let's get back to wireframes. So again, what we're building, we need to have, okay, it's a lot cheaper to kind of scribble on paper and pencil than it is to create an activity, start laying things out, do the constraints or whatever layout you're doing, and then hook up all the code and then realize that's a terrible design. So for wireframes, what you can do is we have for our oil change application, well, what's the first screen? As I said, this kind of slurs my drawing here if I go too quickly. So what's the first screen that your users see? When the users come to the application, what you want to do first and foremost is grab their attention and make sure that they know what the application does. If you're showing them like a video or some kind of advertisement, talk about why you're the best, and it takes a while to get through, they're probably going to close the app and then delete it off their phone. I used to work for a company that we had analytics around this, and the application, what they did is they actually had a video. It was a short kind of video that took up the background, and it was only like 2 or 3 seconds long. And the first thing they did was they slapped a login screen, which you think, okay, well, if it's like Facebook or Instagram or whatever, that's kind of what they do, is they say, okay, log in or create an account. But you'll find when you do that, the drop-off is incredible. You get, let's say you get 100 downloads, and 100 people, let's say 98 people actually open up the application, and you can track that. Only, let's say 10% or 10 of those users will either log in or create an account, which is terrible. You want them to come into the application, see why it's useful, see what they can do with it, before saying, oh, we want your email address, we want everything about you, we want your phone number. They're going to be like, man, I just want my oil change. I don't want all this information out there. I don't want to have to create another account. I don't want to have to create another password, etc. So again, don't do that if you can avoid it. Sometimes you have to, like Facebook, where you have to create an account. Plus they have billions of users, so it doesn't matter if they only capture a small percentage. So keep that in mind. So I do want to stay away from making that first screen a login screen because, again, you want to kind of avoid, essentially you want to have as many users as possible come into the application. All right, so instead of that, what can we do? Can we actually create and have data as part of the application without them creating an app? Maybe. Maybe we can just store that data locally and we can pop up a message or show some kind of indication that if they want to save this across multiple devices, share with a spouse or a co-owner of the car, that that they have to create an account, because they might not be interested in ever creating an account, but you still want them to be a user. And so when they first log into the account, maybe they go through either a quick tutorial, say, okay, add your car, add the make and model and the year, and then let's get started. So you actually just want this to be a get started screen. They're going to be excited. They're like, okay, here's my car, and here's some recommendations, and maybe you can even put in why you're capturing that car. You could say, for older vehicles, you might want to have a higher mileage synthetic oil or whatever. I don't know that much about oil. I just decided it was something that a lot of people could use. And so again, you might have like a kind of a walkthrough, or maybe like a little swipey side scroll view, horizontal scroll view that they can swipe through to see the features of the application. And again, it's just getting started. And then the next screen, what we would have is an entry for the car. So I'm just going to write this out, car entry. Again, you can have multiple cars. That wasn't something we talked about in the features, but you add a car, you can have one or two cars, etc. So let's just get you started. Let's show you the features, track your miles, do all these things, enter a car. And again, I want to keep this really short. So maybe I only have 3 fields, the make, the model, and the year. And well, now that I think about it, the mileage. So again, it's a lot easier to just draw an extra line on a scratch pad like this than it is to try to do this in Android Studio. All right, then we have the car entry. So once we have the car entry, maybe it gives a list of all of the oil changes. Now, obviously, you're not going to have any data in here, so never show a user a blank list view like this. So there's a list view, so it's a view, it's a list view. So this is not helpful to the users. This doesn't indicate anything. They look at it, they go, okay, what am I supposed to do here? Well, maybe there's a plus button at the top here. Let me tap on that and see what that does. Don't ever give that to your user. Instead, you know that there's 0 entries in there, so just put an if statement that says if entries equals 0, oil changes equals 0, the count or the size of that array equals 0. Maybe instead of a list view, we put a little message in here that says, here are your oil changes. You don't have any. Add one, and there's a big button that says add right here. So you're filling up that empty view with something. Okay, so many applications that I see always have empty lists. And it's just like, you just have a big white screen, and it's terrible. So yeah, don't ever do that. All right, so they add they hit the plus button, and that'll allow them to have, let's say, just add oil change. Oops, oil change. Okay, so when I'm adding an oil change, there's a date field. On the date field, don't have them enter the date. Just put today's date and leave it at that. Give them the ability to change it, because maybe they had it yesterday, they're entering it now. But try to pre-populate as much data as you can. So the date on that, what's the mileage? Again, maybe you can guess at this. When I entered the car entry down here, my mileage was, let's say, 100,000 miles. I put that in, and you can do this in the background because when they entered this in, okay, my car is a Toyota Camry 1998 or whatever. It has 100,000 miles. 6 months later, you can look this up. What's the average driving over 6 months? Let's say it's, I don't know, I'm just making numbers up, 10,000. So you can pre-populate that at 110,000 miles. Next, what kind of oil? So this one's a little tricky because the oil type, let's say it's, I'm not going to remember any brands off the top of my head, but this gets really tricky because do I just have this as a text field that they can type in? Because if they type in everything lowercase, or they make everything one word, or everything's in all caps, is that the same as another brand that's spelled appropriately? Or maybe there's a letter in the middle of the word that's that's capitalized. And so that you can do a case-insensitive search on. But again, maybe the letter is different, or maybe they misspell it. And so you'll never be able to match up your data if you're doing sorting on that. So anytime you can avoid having users enter free data in there, or free form data, don't. So just don't allow them to do it if you can. The alternative is you have to find every single oil brand and manufacturer and just put that in a giant list, and then when they tap on that, it pops up a list that they can scroll through, and maybe they can search and filter out to find what they're using. So for example, if the brand is Mike's Synthetic Oil, and they just type in MIKE, and then it brings up everything that has the word Mike in it. So you can do that as well. But again, if you can avoid having people enter in just free-form data, try to avoid it as much as you can. All right, so let's move on a little bit. So I have the oil change the oil change entry, and then once I add that, when I go back to the list view, we'll have a new list of data. And so in that list, maybe we kind of call this out in my row, in my list here. What does that look like? Maybe I take a photo. I don't know. Is that useful? Probably not. So let's not do that. What is useful? What does a user want to see when they see the oil change? Probably the date. They want to see the last date. So maybe at the very top, it's sorted by date. Let's do, and then what form of the date? Do you do February? Do you spell it out, or do you just do 2/ what's today, the 5th /19? I don't know. Maybe experiment with this. Maybe do, obviously this is more of the American format. You can maybe do the year first, and then the month. That's pretty helpful, because if you don't change your oil for every 6 months, you're only going to have on average, two 2019s. So maybe the next one is 2018. So draw this out. See what it looks like. Let's say I didn't change my oil until, I don't know, September. Something like that. Because do I need to know the day? Do I need to know the day of the week? Probably not. Again, it's oil change. Every 6 months, every whatever months. I might just need the day and the month. So again, this is just a nice way of kind of experimenting with this and saying, okay, well, now I have the date. Maybe that's the format I want to try to go with. I want to make it really big because that's the date, or that's the information that I care about. What other information do I care about oil changes? Well, I don't know. I'm not an oil change expert, so I would probably go back to my client and say, okay, when you look at your data, maybe it's the mileage. Maybe the next thing is the mileage. So, maybe put that into big numbers too. Maybe it's the oil, but now you're running out of room. So you really have to decide what's there. But again, all of this kind of will dictate what we build. Once you kind of get this ironed out, and don't feel scared about doing multiple versions of this. As an app developer, you have to put on your designer hat for this. Again, what is the user experience? What's the user interface design look like? All right, and then once we get all these wireframes of everything that we think we'll have, we would even go as deep as, like, if they have a profile with their email addresses, we would do that screen, what that looks like, etc. But I think you get the basic idea. So we'll do this as a homework assignment for your final project. So we'll come up with a scope of work for your final. I'll have you do these wireframes of giving me what the screens will look like, how they'll lay out. And then next week, next Tuesday, we'll start to build this out. So I'll show you how to do a list view. I'll show you how we're going to create this data in here. So we're going to have a model and how we define that model. So this is not an activity. Is anybody in here seeing UML? Okay, yeah, you guys probably took the software engineering course. So in here, you can do UML diagrams. So I would have a class called oil change, and I'm going to abbreviate that, as a model or data, a data class in Kotlin is what we call it. What members and what functionality are we going to have in this object? So again, we're going to have the mileage, we're going to have the date, we're going to have all these different data members as part of this class. But then we're also going to do functionality such as, oh, I don't know. Well, you don't really have too much functionality in here besides maybe add or remove or something like that. I can't think of it off the top of my head. And then we're going to have another object, again in UML. And this is going to be called oil change manager. And this is what this object is going to control everything that has to do with oil changes. So when you add an oil change, it'll go in this object. So we're going to create this guy, this oil change model, in this activity. But then we're going to take that piece of data and we're going to pass it down to this oil change manager. Then when we go back to this activity, the ListView activity, the ListView is going to ask, hey, oil change manager, how many oil changes are there? Oh, there's 10. Okay, well, go and grab me those. And out of those objects, out of those oil change objects, go get me the mileage, go get me the date, and then you can display it in each row, which is going to look like this. So really just the date and the mileage in this case. And the reason why, again, we put it in to this object is because now we have multiple views that care about the same data. So our list view needs to know what data, namely mileage and date, to display in each row. And then if I tap on a row to edit it, well, then I need to go and grab that oil change data for that particular row and display it in this, let's call it oil change details. And it really helps to name these because when we create the activities for these, I don't need to think of a name for the activity. I just know what it is based on this one. Okay, so just wanted to make sure we cover everything before I let you go. But, oh, the other thing is when the oil change manager gets a new oil change added to it, I can alert this list view, hey, there's a change in your data. You need to add another row. So if I add a oil change, I want that to display somewhere in here. But if you add it over here in this oil change details activity, and then you go back and you dismiss that activity, you go back to the main activity, which is the list view, well, you have to update the list view, but you don't want to do that every time you go back to the list view because there might not be new data, and that's just a waste of CPU and hence battery on the mobile device. So by going to the oil change manager and saying add, well, the oil change manager knows that the list view cares about that data change, and without these two objects knowing too much about each other, is what we call coupling. Remember that spaghetti code? They can just kind of magically know about each other wirelessly if you take that metaphor. So that's actually the video that's coming out on Wednesday, is going to talk about how to decouple our different activities and not have to have every single activity that cares about the data tied to each other. We can just stick it in one object. This object kind of notifies who needs to know about it, and it just takes care of itself. Is there any questions on this so far? Okay, so hopefully this gave you a good idea, and then on Tuesday, as I mentioned, we'll start to build this out because this is pretty much as far as we're going to take this app. But this is what I want you to do for the next homework assignment, which I'll assign probably next week sometime. Yeah. And then just as a reminder, Thursday is going to be a workshop, so there's not going to be a live stream for those who are on the stream right now. Thursday, we're not going to have one. I'll send out an email with all this, but if you guys don't have any other questions, I'll let you go. Thanks, guys.